Well, first of all, we were at Steve.
Oh, that was already in. I don't know if he was in Allentown yet, but Pop worked at the cement mill then later on, and
He told me about the Pop and his brothers that were building the house in Ormrod.
yeah,
And then after that...
came Eddie.
Eddie, okay.
And he was born in Ormrod.
I see.
You're
Eddie was
already
born.
in Ormrod.
No, right. Eddie was born, and now somewhere along the line, Bowden comes in. What we're there is Bowden was a baby. Where was he a baby?
In Ormrod.
In Ormrod. That's what we want to hear about. What you were doing in Ormrod, and now your sisters and Bowden. Who looked after Bowden?
Mary was the older one.
Bowden was born what year, do you think?
When he was born in Massachusetts. In Ormrod. Bowden was.
Yeah, probably in 1930. How old is Eddie today?
You'd have to ask Eddie. I could call him.
Well, no. Is how much younger than you was Eddie? 10 years. What do you think?
I can't remember. Oh, he's how much younger? He's younger than you. And
okay, let's start with Steve. So Steve was born.
Steve.
And then when did Eddie come? 2 years later or a year later?
He came about I'd say about 3 years later.
After Steve.
After Steve.
Okay, so now Eddie's born 3 years after Steve. Let's talk about Bowden. How far after Eddie?
Must have been another 3 years.
Another 3 years. So Eddie would have been 3 years old when Bowden was born. Something like that.
Something.
Close.
Something.
And so who looked after all these kids? We had...
My mother took care, and my aunt, my Uncle Joe's wife, was getting married about the same time.
Uh-huh.
And
Uncle Joe, okay. What's his last name?
Uncle Joe. And they...
What was his last name?
Humka.
Humka, okay.
Chomka. And when he married this woman, he was getting married to this woman. They rented a house on the hill up in
and she was a good woman.
And then they were on the hill. They rented I think there was a guy named Hannah that rented the house there, and she was a little bit wild. And as I remember...
Who was wild? Hannah or...
Anna, Joe Humko's wife.
Ah.
And they lived like the road was here and then there was a hill. And she lived above the hill. And then one day, and soon after they were married, she ran down that hill right into the reservoir. She swam. She was swimming in the reservoir in Bath, Portland Cement Mill.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
So did the rest of you go and swim? Or?
No, we watched. You know, this was an idiot, but we watched.
Was the reservoir like the cliffs? Or there was the one from Ormrod that was about a mile away. You told me the story one time when I was with the dog.
Coming down the hill, it was quite a hill, you know, down to the road, across the road, and then there was the reservoir.
Okay.
And it was from the mill, the water used to flush down there, whatever it was.
Well, let's go back to your family. So we have Mary, we have you second, we have Katie, Olga, Steve, Eddie, and Bowden. And there must have been almost 15, 20 years between them. From Mary to Bowden must have been, when Bowden was born, Mary was already a teenager.
It was thing that happened when Katie was with, Katie was about maybe 6, 7, she was about 7 years old. And from the mill, trucks used to come with hot ashes and dump it near the reservoir there on the pile. And Katie stepped into it. And then she took a walk into the reservoir. There was a stream coming like that. And she stepped into the reservoir and was soaking her foot from that hot ash that she burned her legs. And somebody came to my mother and told her, and my mother went after her. Now, in the meantime, my father had a truck, and my father, this was close to whatever, Easter time, and people wanted certain things, and my pop used to drive to Allentown and pick up food and deliver it to, my mother had a big front opening for a store. They opened it and made a little store.
Where was that, in Armrod?
Yeah.
And as I recall, the house had
The
like
bath.
a front porch. So where was the store?
In Bath.
Not in Bath or in the back?
In Bath, off the hill coming down.
So
Then-
it wasn't, the store wasn't in Armrod at the house.
It was there. It was open from the back side.
Oh, from the back, not Bath, from the back.
So
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out that's about, and in the, you couldn't come in from just the front way. There were outside toilets, then you go on the side into the door, which was like an opening to the store, and she had a family named Lasowski girls who would clean up the store, and the neighbor on this side, Kowalczyk, and that woman had 7 or 8 kids. Them women were putting up with this. Old man Kowalczyk. I'll tell you about Kowalczyk. He was my mother's neighbor, and my mother was the store lady already, and she had a porch with a bench on it. Now, Mrs. Kowalczyk was pregnant, and she had this baby. She sat on the bench, and old man Kowalczyk, he was mad. He says, all those kids in the house, they need attention. And he started to beat on her. And my mother, this is a true story, my mother was mad that his wife, with all those kids, and she's taking care of the kids, and when he hit her, she fell on the floor, and he started to kick her with the heel of his shoe, from what I heard. And then my mother took the broom and started to hit Mr. Kowalczyk, and he ran around in the circle on the backyard. And my mother told that story a few times. And Mrs. Kowalczyk, she had John, Mike, Olga, Andrew, Harry, and Charlie, and Steve. Now, the boys were already smart enough to talk about a ball game. And John and Mike and Andrew and somebody ran down the railroad track. They were going to the ball game. And little Charlie followed them. And alongside of that last house where Kowalczyks lived was a big cornfield. And this kid got lost in the cornfield, Charlie. He ran after them and he got lost. And the whole section was looking for him. From the mill down the railroad track all around, they were looking for this boy named Charlie. And when they found him, they asked him, where he was. He said that they said he was lost 3 days. Then they said to him, "What did you eat? You were hungry." Yes, he was hungry. And he had bird eggs.
So he was lost for 3 days.
He was lost 3 days.
So there must have been a lot of people looking for him.
Yes, from the mill.
Yeah. How many people do you think?
There's quite a few people. A true story.